Well, this morning, more sweeping cuts of the federal workforce, this time at NOAA. Sources tell CNN that 800 agency employees have been tapped for terminations, with more firings possible today. But a federal judge has now granted temporary relief for some of the organizations fighting President Trump's dismantling of the government. He ruled that the mass firings of probationary federal workers is likely unlawful, writing, quote, "The Office of Personnel Management does not have any authority whatsoever under any statute in the history of the universe to hire or fire any employees but its own." CNN's Renee Marsh joins us now. Wow, this judge did not mince words. What is the immediate impact of the decision?
Well, this judge specifically blocked the Department of Defense from firing probationary employees that they were planning to fire this Friday, which is today. But really, Pamela, it's unclear what the full impact is going to be on the thousands of probationary employees at other agencies who have already been fired. What this ruling really did was essentially state that OPM does not have the authority and overstepped its authority to essentially instruct these agencies to fire or how to manage their own workforce. And that's what the judge was saying in that quite interesting quote here. It's quite forceful quote here where he says there is no statute in the history of the universe in which OPM has the authority to hire or fire employees other than their own. But at the heart of this was this February 14th memo that essentially OPM told these agencies to identify employees who were not considered essential and send separation letters to these individuals. These probationary employees are people who have been on the job for less than a year. Now, the Trump administration's lawyers argued that we made an ask. We didn't force these agencies to do this. The judge was not buying that. However, the judge did acknowledge that agencies themselves do have the right and authority to fire probationary employees. And this judge also said that he didn't have the power to reinstate these probationary employees, the thousands of them that had already been fired. So again, unclear what the full impact of this ruling will be, but it is clear that the OPM doesn't have the authority to tell these agencies to do this.
All right, Renee Marsh, thank you so much. Great to see you.
A federal judge is blocking efforts by the Trump administration and the Department of Government Efficiency to slash the federal workforce. Now, the judge in San Francisco ruled the mass firings of probationary federal employees are, quote, likely unlawful. Now, labor unions and nonprofits are suing on behalf of thousands of probationary employees who have lost their jobs. I want to bring in Kevin Owen. He's an employment attorney who represents federal workers. Thank you for being here. You know, to this point, you've compared this initiative to the kind of disruptions that are typically caused by government shutdowns. What do you mean by that?
So in the Chico memo that was issued by OPM 2 days ago outlining these mass layoffs, what the OPM is saying is that employees who are typically not designated as essential during a lapse in appropriations are the ones that are going to be targeted for these mass layoffs. And in 2016, we saw 800,000 federal employees nationwide laid off during the lapse in appropriation for a government shutdown. And so what Americans can be looking for here is the type of shutdown that lasted in the fall of 2016, which closed national parks, closed Social Security agency offices, and really deprived Americans of the federal services that they're used to.
And, you know, one of the other things you said previously is that their plan at this point is to get sued. What do you mean by that?
So they're not going through the normal processes legally that you would expect to happen.
To a rough legal week for Trump. This week, judges handed down a string of losses and major setbacks as the barrage of lawsuits against his agenda continue. So let's review. Early this week, judges blocking Elon Musk's department from accessing sensitive data in 2 agencies and blocking ICE arrests in religious spaces for some groups. But a ban on the Associated Press from covering Trump was upheld. Trump losing 2 separate rulings over freezing foreign aid funds, but a last-minute intervention by SCOTUS allowed the freeze to continue. The administration also dealt losses over an attempted refugee ban, funding to hospitals offering gender-affirming care, and an extension granted to reinstate a watchdog head that Trump seeks to fire. The Supreme Court is set to rule on that case soon. However, a judge did side with Trump over the firings of dozens of intelligence officers, but another judge blocked the mass firings of probationary officers across the government. A Musk employee now ordered to testify against the Trump administration in a union lawsuit. And today, an appeals court maintaining an injunction against Trump's ban on birthright citizenship. I get it. That's a lot. But the key takeaway here is the following. Trump is clearly losing more than he is winning. Joining me now for more, Leah Littman, University of Michigan law professor and the host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast. Leah, it's good to see you. I need to know, in your opinion, what's up with all these legal losses? Is the rule of law holding the line?
The rule of law is temporarily holding the line, but I think we should also be realistic about what these losses indicate. One is they underscore just how outlandish some of the administration's arguments are. They are truly reaching right to the ends of the earth as far as the scope of presidential power, and courts are rightly trying to force them to hew to the line that our Constitution delineates. But second, we should also recognize that courts are not stopping everything. Even in some of the USAID freeze cases you mentioned, where plaintiffs prevailed, the administration has yet to actually pay out a lot of the money. So there are still cases and still things that have been going on that while courts are trying to do something, in some ways the administration is moving too quickly, too chaotically to wind back the clock in some instances.
So, Leah, procedure is always really important when it comes to the law. So sometimes you can't even get to the substance until you deal with the procedure. What are the remedies available to Trump's administration as a result of these losses? Meaning, are we going to see these make it to the Supreme Court on an expedited basis, or are we going to see these cases kind of play out on their normal speed?
I think they are absolutely going to try to get to the Supreme Court as quickly as possible. And that's in part because, the Trump administration recognizes that they have some friends on the Supreme Court. He appointed 3 of the justices in the current Republican supermajority. And in the New York Times reporting on the origins of Doge today, they indicated that the people who were orchestrating Doge felt emboldened by the fact that they thought this Supreme Court would share their wild, extreme vision of executive power. A lot of these cases are still in the lower courts, and the Trump administration is likely to rush up to the Supreme Court as quickly as they can because that court is going to be more favorable to them than the average trial court judge that they are having these cases heard before.
Fascinating lawsuit just filed today in the United States District Court in the District of Columbia. It's the Democratic Party suing Trump, asserting that he violated federal election law, saying, quote, the assertion is incompatible with nearly a century's worth of Supreme Court precedent, blessing Congress's authority to insulate certain agencies and officials from day-to-day control by the president.
Joining me now are 2 law professors, former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuaid and Washington Post contributing columnist Natasha Sarin. Natasha has also counseled the then Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. So, Barb, this order says the OPM cannot directly lay off federal employees. However, individual agencies can. What's the difference there?
Well, the Office of Personnel Management is a management organization. They are not the bosses of these individuals. And so when they directed the termination of these employees, they lacked authority to do that. Only the agencies themselves have the authority to do that. Now, maybe it is ultimately a distinction without a difference. If they suggest to the agencies that they terminate these employees and then the agencies themselves do this, perhaps that is lawful. Jose, this reminds me an awful lot of Donald Trump's first travel ban. Remember when there was chaos at the borders 5 days after he had taken office? He issued this thing that said travelers from certain countries could not come into the United States. And it was an absolute mess. And it took him 3 tries until he was able to achieve what he wanted to through a lawful order. It strikes me as something very similar. Ultimately, if he wants to fire probationary employees in the federal government, he probably can do that. But it is going to take a few rounds of figuring it out, how to do it at the right level before he can be successful in executing this plan.
And Natasha, for the first time ever, a Doge employee is being ordered to provide written discovery and will be deposed. It's in a lawsuit over attempted access to sensitive information, Labor Department systems. How significant is this step toward Doge transparency?
Yeah, I mean, big picture, kind of what is striking about what's happening right now is you have Doge and you have Elon Musk as kind of this unelected and basically unchecked set of powers in the federal government that are reshaping the government in such meaningful ways. It's around data access. It's around, as Barbara's talking about, these massive sweeping changes to who works in the federal government. It's around whether or not the federal government is going to appropriate dollars that Congress says should go to particular people or to particular countries. And that all of that is just an incredibly difficult challenge. The challenge is not just whether the government can do this and whether the executive can do this. As Barbara points out, it's how they're doing it and how they're going about this. And you've seen 35 plus legal challenges across the country. I suspect many more are to come.
Folks, what we're seeing here is Donald flipping out. Now, earlier today, we saw him blow a gasket when it came to his meeting with one of America's allies, treating him with just the uttermost disrespect, an embarrassment to the United States. Frankly, certainly every Trump voter should be embarrassed, but I know many non-Trump voters feel embarrassed for their president acting like that. But it's like, why is he being, even for him, it's shocking. There's a reason why it's been so big today. It's because he was shocking, even for him. The conduct was below the standards we expect for Donald friggin' Trump. And my educated speculation is that he's on edge because of all the legal defeats he's been taking. This has been a thing in the past. Sometimes news has broke and it's explained Donald Trump's unhinged conduct for the previous 2 or 3 days. This happened last year when Donald was acting extra crazy in certain parts of 2023, 2024. And one of the times I said, guys, get ready. He just got bad legal news. And he's flipping out about unrelated things, but really this is about his indictments. And lo and behold, that day or the next day, he announced to the world on his social media, I am being indicted, and was his first indictment. And so Donald taking a legal defeat here with all of his executive actions being torn down is in part the reason he snapped today.